The city of London was a place of endless grey. Grey smoke curled from the chimneys of factories. Grey fog clung to the narrow streets, and a grey feeling of tiredness seemed to hang over everyone. For a young woman named Elara, life was a cycle of long, hard days working in a noisy textile mill, and returning each evening to a small, cold room that felt nothing like a home. She was lonely and dreamed of a life filled with more than just the constant hum of machinery and the smell of soot. Her one spark of joy arrived every few weeks in the form of a letter postmarked from America. The letters were from a man named Samuel, who lived on a ranch in a place called Montana. He described a world that seemed like a fairy tale to Elara. He wrote of golden fields that stretched all the way to the horizon, of mountains that pierced the blue sky, and of a life spent in the fresh air, working with horses under the warm sun. His words were filled with promise and painted a picture of a beautiful, peaceful future. Samuel's letters grew more frequent and more persuasive. He told Elara he had built a successful and prosperous life, and that what was missing was a partner to share it with. He spoke of a comfortable homestead and a love that would be as vast and open as the prairie itself. He eventually enclosed a ticket for the long journey across the ocean, formally asking her to come to Montana to be his wife. Filled with a hope she had not felt in years, Elara made her decision. She sold her few meager possessions, said a quiet goodbye to the only city she had ever known, and with a heart fluttering with a mixture of fear and excitement, she boarded an enormous steamship. As the coastline of England faded into the mist, she clutched Samuel's letters tightly, her eyes fixed on the west, dreaming of the golden new life that awaited her. The journey felt like it would never end. After what seemed like an eternity on the rolling waves of the Atlantic, Elara finally arrived in New York. The city was a roaring chaos of noise and people that was nothing like Samuel's descriptions of quiet, open spaces. Without pausing to rest, she boarded a train that chugged its way across the entire continent. She watched through the grimy window as forests gave way to flat grasslands, and then to landscapes of breathtaking emptiness. The sky truly was bigger here, a vast bowl of brilliant blue that went on forever. This, she thought, must be the beauty he wrote about. Her hopeful heart beat faster as the conductor called out her final stop, the town of Billings in the Montana Territory. She stepped onto the dusty wooden platform, her London dress feeling out of place among the practical trousers and boots of the people around her. She scanned the faces of the men waiting, looking for one that might match the hopeful voice from the letters. Her eyes landed on a man leaning against a post, his hat pulled low. He was taller than she imagined, with a sternness in his posture that made her hesitate. When he noticed her, he pushed himself upright and walked over. His handshake was brief and his fingers were calloused and rough. He did not smile. He simply said her name, Elara, as a statement, not a welcome. He took her single suitcase and nodded toward a wagon hitched to a tired-looking horse. The ride to the ranch was long and silent. The immense silence of the prairie pressed in on her, feeling heavy and isolating instead of peaceful. Samuel did not speak. He did not point out the scenery or ask about her trip. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw set. When the wagon finally crested a low hill, he gestured with his chin toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. "There it is," he said, his voice flat. Elara's breath caught, but not in wonder. The house was a small, weathered shack, its paint peeling under the sun. The barn sagged to one side, and the fields surrounding them were not golden with wheat but choked with weeds and scrub. This was not a prosperous ranch. It was a place barely clinging to life. Samuel unloaded her suitcase onto the dusty ground. He finally turned to look at her directly, and his eyes were as cold and hard as the stones in the field. "I suppose you'll be expecting supper," he said. "The stove is inside. You'll find provisions in the cupboard." He then laid out the new rules of her life. She was to cook all meals, keep the house clean, tend to the vegetable garden, and help with the animals. There was no talk of partnership or love or the future they would build. He had not wanted a wife. He had wanted a worker, one who would not cost him a wage and who had nowhere else to run. The beautiful promise that had carried her across 5,000 miles lay shattered at her feet, as dry and barren as the dust blowing across the yard. The first light of dawn became Elara's enemy. Each morning, the sun would rise over the distant mountains, painting the sky in colors she could no longer see, signaling the start of another day of endless labor. Samuel's true nature was revealed not in a single dramatic event, but in 1,000 small cruelties that piled upon her spirit like heavy stones. He was a man of few words, but the words he chose were always designed to diminish her. If she cooked a stew, he would grunt that it was bland and push the bowl away. If she tried to mend a fence, as he had ordered, he would laugh a harsh, short laugh and tell her she was useless, that her city hands were too soft for real work. The isolation was a physical weight. The prairie, which from a train window had seemed so majestic, was now a vast, empty prison. There were no neighbors for miles, no kind faces to see in a market, no sound but the relentless wind and Samuel's critical voice. She would sometimes stand in the yard and turn in a complete circle, seeing nothing but grass and sky in every direction, and feel a terror so profound it made her knees weak. She was utterly, completely alone. Her only comfort, a small secret she kept from Samuel, was a beautiful silver hairbrush. It had belonged to her mother, a final gift before she passed away. It was not just an object. It was a memory of gentleness, of love, of a time when she felt cared for. Each night, after her chores were finally done, she would take it from its hiding place at the bottom of her suitcase and run it through her hair. In that small ritual, she could almost hear her mother's voice, and for a few precious moments, she did not feel entirely lost. One evening, Samuel returned from a trip to town in a darker mood than usual. He had been drinking, and his eyes had a mean, glittering look she had come to fear. He slammed the door open and stomped into the main room, his gaze sweeping over the clean floor and the pot of soup simmering on the stove. He grunted, a sound of pure dissatisfaction. "This place is a pigsty," he muttered, though it was spotless. "And that smell. What did you burn now?" Elara said nothing, simply stirring the soup. Silence was the safest response, but he was looking for a fight. His eyes landed on her suitcase in the corner. "What worthless things did you drag all the way from England?" He sneered, lurching toward it. A jolt of pure panic shot through her. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing in there." He ignored her, flipping the latches open and digging through her few belongings with rough, disrespectful hands. He tossed a spare dress aside, then a small book, and then he went still. He pulled out the silver hairbrush, holding it up. The polished silver caught the dim light of the lamp. A greedy smile spread across his face. "Well now," he slurred, "this is something. This is real silver." "No," Elara pleaded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "Please, Samuel. That was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. It's not worth anything to anyone but me." He closed his fist around it, his knuckles white. "Everything on this ranch is mine," he stated, his voice cold and final. "Including this. You earn your keep through work, not through keeping pretty trinkets." He shoved the brush into his pocket and turned away, leaving her standing there, her plea hanging in the air between them, unanswered and ignored. The next week was a special kind of torment. Samuel went into town again, and Elara was left with the crushing certainty that her most precious possession was gone forever. A few days later, when she was sent to town with a list of supplies he needed, she gathered every ounce of her courage. Her hands trembled as she tied the horse to the post outside the general store. Instead of going in, she walked down the wooden sidewalk, her eyes scanning the storefronts until she saw it, the pawn shop. Her feet felt like lead as she approached the dusty window. And there it was, her mother's hairbrush. It sat on a velvet cloth behind the glass, a small price tag tied to its handle. The world seemed to narrow to that single point. He had not even kept it. He had sold it for a few coins. The violation was so complete, so absolute, that it burned away her fear, leaving behind a clean, sharp anger. That evening, when Samuel returned, she was waiting for him. The stew was on the table. The house was clean, but her posture was different. She stood straight, her hands clenched at her sides. He walked in, hung up his hat, and sat down to eat without a word. "I saw the hairbrush today," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "In the pawn shop window in town." He paused, a spoonful of stew halfway to his mouth. He looked up at her, his eyes narrowing. So, she said, the anger giving her strength. "I want it back." "It was not yours to sell." "It was mine. It is the only thing I asked you to leave alone." He slowly put the spoon down. The room grew very quiet. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. "You want to tell me what is mine?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You, who eats my food, who lives under my roof. You have nothing. You are nothing. The trinket bought supplies you will use. Be grateful it was good for something." He took a step toward her. Elara stood her ground, though every instinct told her to run. "It was my mother's," she repeated, her voice cracking with emotion. That was all it took. His hand moved so fast he didn't see it coming. The open-handed slap caught her across the cheek, snapping her head to the side. The pain was instant and shocking, a white-hot sting that brought immediate tears to her eyes. She stumbled back, catching herself on the edge of the table, her ears ringing. He stood over her, his breath smelling of tobacco and whiskey. "Let there be a lesson," he spat. "You do not make demands of me. You do not question me. You will do as you are told and be grateful for it. Now clean this mess up." He turned and walked out the door, leaving it swinging open behind him, the cold night air rushing in. Elara slid to the floor, her hand pressed to her throbbing cheek. The physical pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the pain of that final, complete rejection. He had not just hit her. He had shattered the last fragile illusion that things might get better. As she heard the sound of his wagon rattling away toward town, a new feeling rose up through the despair. It was not hope. It was a desperate, terrifying resolve. She could not stay here. She would not survive it. She would rather take her chances with the vast, unknown darkness of the prairie than spend one more night under his roof. The time for enduring was over. The time for running was now. The slam of the door echoed in the silence Samuel left behind. Elara remained on the floor, the rough wooden planks cold beneath her. Her cheek pulsed with a hot, throbbing pain, a brutal testament to his final words. But the sting was a clarion call, cutting through the fog of her fear and misery. In that moment, a terrifying clarity descended upon her. This was her life now. There would be no softening of his heart, no discovery of hidden kindness. There was only more work, more criticism, and now more violence. The vast emptiness of the prairie that had once felt like a prison now presented itself as her only possible escape. Moving with a speed born of pure desperation, she got to her feet. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands were steady. She went to her small suitcase. She could not take it. It would be too heavy, too obvious. Instead, she put on every layer of clothing she owned, a second dress over the first, both thin and ill-suited for the chilling night air. She wrapped a shawl tightly around her shoulders and head. Her mother's hairbrush was gone, but she would not leave the memory of her completely. She tucked a small, faded photograph of her parents into her pocket. She paused at the door, listening. There was no sound but the relentless wind moaning across the land. Taking a single deep breath that did nothing to calm her nerves, she stepped out into the overwhelming darkness. She did not take the road. He would expect that. Instead, she struck out across the open field, the tall, dry grass whipping at her legs, snacking on her skirts. The moon, a thin sliver in the sky, offered little light, and she stumbled often over unseen rocks and dips in the earth. Every shadow was a predator. Every rustle in the grass was a snake coiling to strike. The immensity of the landscape was suffocating. She was a single, tiny speck under a blanket of countless cold stars, utterly insignificant and achingly alone. The wind seemed to carry whispers, and more than once she froze, certain she heard the distant creak of wagon wheels or the sound of his voice calling her name. It was only the wind playing tricks on her terrified mind. Her breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. The cold began to seep through her layers, a deep chill that settled into her bones. How far could she possibly get? What would she eat? Where would she find water? The hopelessness of her situation threatened to paralyze her. She walked for what felt like hours, her body aching, her feet sore and bleeding in her thin shoes. The initial burst of adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. She found a small cluster of rocks and huddled against them, seeking a moment's respite from the wind. She pulled her knees to her chest and allowed the tears to come, silent, hopeless tears that froze on her cheeks. This was it. She would die out here, alone and forgotten. She had traded a violent home for a lonely death in the wild. It was a foolish, stupid choice. She began to shiver uncontrollably. It was then that she heard it. A sound that was different from the wind. A steady, rhythmic sound. A slow and purposeful crunching on the hard earth. The sound of a horse walking. Her blood ran cold. He had found her. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the rocks, squeezing her eyes shut, praying to become invisible. The sound grew closer, then stopped. She could hear the soft snort of the horse, the creak of leather. She held her breath. Whoa there, ma'am. The voice was not Samuel's. It was a low, calm baritone, weathered and rough like the land itself, but devoid of malice. It was a voice that spoke of patience. You were a long way from anywhere, slowly, fearfully. Elara opened her eyes. The moon cast just enough light to outline a man sitting tall on a patient horse. He was not Samuel. His silhouette was broader, his hat shaped differently. He made no sudden moves. He simply sat there, a solid, quiet presence in the vast night. "You look like you could use some help," he said, his voice even and gentle. He did not ask what she was doing there. He did not demand an explanation. He simply saw a person in clear distress. He nudged his horse a single step closer, not in threat, but in offering. Then he did something that broke the last of her resolve. He slowly removed his heavy, weathered coat and held it out to her. "The night's cold," he said. "You'll freeze." Elara looked from the coat to the man's shadowed face. Every instinct warned her against trusting anyone. But his kindness, the simple, practical offer of warmth, was so starkly different from anything she had known in Montana that it disarmed her completely. Her shivering was becoming uncontrollable. With a trembling hand, she reached out and took the rough coat. It was heavy and warm from his body heat. She poured it around her shoulders, and its weight felt like a shelter. The man sat quietly, giving her time. After a long moment, he extended his hand down toward her, not to grab, but to wait for her to choose. "Name's Caleb," he said. "My place isn't far. There's a warm fire and no questions asked." Looking up at that offered hand, Elara made a choice. It was not a choice made from certainty, but from the last flicker of hope that had somehow survived the night. She reached up and placed her cold, small hand into his large, calloused one. His grip was firm and sure and careful as he helped her up onto the horse behind him. She held onto the back of the saddle, and as the horse turned and began to walk, she looked back only once at the dark emptiness she was leaving behind. She was moving towards something unknown, but for the first time in a very long time, she was not moving toward it alone. The ride to Caleb's ranch was a blur of exhaustion and surreal calm. Elara held tightly to the back of the saddle, her body swaying with the horse's steady gait. She kept her face turned away from the wind, buried in the rough wool of the coat Caleb had given her. It smelled of wood smoke, horses, and honest sweat, a scent that was foreign yet strangely comforting. Caleb did not speak during the journey. He simply guided his horse with a quiet confidence through the darkness, a solid and silent protector against the immense night. When they finally arrived, it was not at a grand house, but at a homestead that felt deeply and fundamentally right. The main cabin was built from sturdy logs, with a stone chimney from which a thin, welcoming wisp of smoke curled into the sky. A well-kept barn stood nearby, its doors closed against the cold. A lantern hung by the door, casting a soft golden pall of light onto the porch. As Caleb helped her down from the horse, the door opened and a woman with a kind, lined face and a practical apron stood there. She took in the scene in an instant. A young woman shivering in a man's coat, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Her own expression softened with immediate concern. "Good heavens, Caleb," she said, her voice warm and full of care. "Bring her in. Bring her in out of the cold. Don't just stand there." She ushered them inside, closing the door firmly against the world. The inside of the cabin was the complete opposite of Samuel's bleak shack. It was a single room, but it was warm, clean, and orderly. A large fire crackled in the hearth, its heat reaching every corner. The smell of baking bread and dried herbs hung in the air. Colorful quilts were folded over a chair, and copper pots gleamed from where they hung on the wall. "It was a home, I may," the woman said, gently guiding Elara to a chair near the fire. "You just sit yourself down, child. Let's get you warmed up. May ask no prying questions." She simply bustled about, pouring a cup of hot tea from a pot always kept on the stove, and spreading a thick quilt over Elara's knees. Caleb hung his hat on a peg by the door and went to tend to his horse, giving them space. Once Elara had stopped shivering, May helped her wash the dust and dried tears from her face. She winced when she saw the faint, bruising mark on Elara's cheek, but she only clucked her tongue softly, a sound of sympathy, not pity. She brought out a tin of salve and gently applied it, the touch of her hands motherly and kind. She then led Elara to a small curtained off area where a narrow bed waited, piled high with blankets. "This is for you," May said. "You sleep as long as you need. Everything else can wait for the sun." Elara lay down on the soft mattress, the weight of the blankets a comforting pressure. She could hear the low murmur of Caleb and May talking by the fire, their voices a quiet, reassuring rumble. For the first time since she had left England, she felt safe. The lock on the door was not to keep her in, but to keep the world out. She was not a prisoner here. She was a guest. The realization was so overwhelming that fresh tears welled in her eyes, but these were tears of relief. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her body and soul finally allowing themselves to rest. She awoke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of frying bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, the previous night feeling like a strange dream. Then she saw the quilt, the sturdy log walls, and remembered. She was safe when she emerged. May placed a plate of food in front of her, a feast compared to what she was used to. Caleb was already at the table, sipping coffee. He nodded a good morning to her, his expression calm. After they had eaten, he pushed his chair back and looked at her. A day's work here is long, he began, his tone matter of fact. But it's fair. I could use a hand mending the fence line in the south pasture. The work pays a fair wage, and it includes your room and board with May. He laid the offer out simply. It was not charity. It was not a demand. It was a chance, an opportunity to earn her place, to stand on her own 2 feet through her own effort. He was giving her back her dignity. Elara looked from his earnest face to May's kind one. She nodded, her voice firm for the first time in months. I would like that very much, she said. Thank you. And she knew she was not just thanking him for the job, but for the rescue, for the warmth, and for the simple, profound gift of a choice. A new rhythm began for Elara, one dictated not by fear and criticism, but by the honest cycles of the sun and the needs of the land. Each morning she woke in her small bed, the air crisp and the cabin already warm from May's activity at the stove. After a breakfast eaten together around the sturdy table, she would join Caleb outside. The work was physically demanding, but it was a different kind of tiredness than what she had known at Samuel's. This fatigue felt earned, satisfying, a testament to her own growing strength. Caleb was a patient teacher. He showed her how to hold a hammer so she wouldn't get blisters, how to judge the tension of a fence wire, and how to identify the different calls of the birds that lived on the prairie. He never raised his voice. If she made a mistake, he would simply say, "Here, let's try it like this," and demonstrate again. Under his quiet guidance, her city soft hands grew calloused and capable. She learned the names of all the horses and could collect eggs from the hens without being pecked. The vast, intimidating landscape began to feel familiar, even welcoming. She learned to watch for the way the light changed over the mountains in the afternoon, signaling the approach of evening. Her friendship with May deepened into something precious. In the evenings, by the light of the kerosene lamp, May taught her how to knead bread dough until it was elastic and how to preserve vegetables from the garden for the winter. They would talk, their voices soft. Elara slowly began to share pieces of her story, not the whole painful tapestry, but fragments. She spoke of London's greyness, the long journey, the disappointment. May listened without judgment, her presence a quiet anchor. In return, May shared stories of her own life, of coming west as a young bride, of the hardships and the joys of building a life from nothing. Elara was learning a new history, one of resilience and community. She noticed things about Caleb, small details that built a picture of the man he was. He always made sure her axe was sharp before she chopped kindling. He would subtly position himself between her and a nervous horse. When they went into town for supplies, he never left her side. His presence was a silent, solid shield, a warning to anyone who might look at the new arrival with curiosity. In the case of a certain rancher they sometimes saw, with a glare of resentment. Caleb never mentioned these actions. He simply did them, as naturally as he breathed. The seasons turned. The fierce summer heat gave way to the brilliant gold of autumn. One evening, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the northern lights weave shimmering curtains of green and violet across the starry sky. The air was cold, but Elara was wrapped in a warm sweater May had knitted for her. The silence between them was comfortable, filled only with the sounds of the night. Caleb finally spoke, his voice quiet and thoughtful. I knew Samuel Fletcher, he said, not looking at her but at the distant horizon. I knew the kind of man he was. Knew he was mean and that his place was falling down around him because of his own laziness. He paused, choosing his words with care. When I found you on that road that night, I saw a lot of things. I saw you were scared. I saw you were hurt. He turned then to look at her, his face earnest in the ethereal light. But more than that, I saw a courage I don't know if I've ever seen before. You weren't just running away from something terrible. You were running towards something, even if you didn't know what it was yet. You were choosing the unknown over a certain misery. That takes a powerful kind of strength. He took a slow breath. I aim to be what you were running toward, Elara. This life, this place, me. I want to build a real life with you, a true partnership. If you'll have me. He wasn't offering a grand, dramatic romance from a storybook. He was offering her what he had always given her: honesty, respect, a shared purpose. He was offering her a place that was already hers, and asking her to claim it with him forever. He was looking at the strong, capable woman she had become and asking her to stay. Elara listened to Caleb's words under the vast, starry sky. They were not flowery or poetic, but they were the truest words anyone had ever spoken to her. He had seen her not as a helpless victim, but as a person of courage. He had not offered to save her. He had asked to stand beside her. He saw the woman she had become on his ranch, the woman with calloused hands and a steady gaze, and he valued her. The memory of the desperate, terrified girl on the dark road seemed like a story about someone else from a long time ago. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the kindness in his eyes that had been there from the very first moment. She saw the strength in his hands that could gentle a spooked horse or mend a broken fence. She saw the quiet patience that had taught her so much. She thought of the home he and May had built, a place of warmth and safety and mutual respect. This was the promise the letters had falsely made. This was the life she had crossed an ocean hoping to find. A slow, sure smile spread across her face, one that reached all the way to her eyes, something she had not felt in such a long time. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch step between them. Her hand, once soft and unused, was now tanned and strong, a match for his own. "Yes, Caleb," she said, her voice clear and full of a certainty that resonated in the quiet night. "I will have you. I will have this life. This is my home." The wedding was a simple affair held in front of the homestead with May beaming like a proud mother and a few neighboring ranchers in attendance. It was not about fine clothes or expensive things. It was about a promise made under the same big sky that had witnessed her lowest moment and now her greatest joy together. Elara and Caleb built more than just a marriage. They built a world. They expanded the garden, planting flowers alongside the vegetables. They raised new calves and foals, and the ranch thrived under their shared care. Elara's laughter became a common sound, mingling with the wind and the lowing of the cattle. She was no longer a visitor or hired help. She was the heart of the home, Caleb's partner in every sense of the word. The man who had traveled 5,000 miles to be rejected and beaten had found a man who saw her true worth. Caleb did not just give her a safe place to stay. He did not just give her a job. He looked at her and saw his entire world, and he spent every day making sure she knew it. And Elara, who had known such deep loneliness, now knew a love as vast and enduring as the Montana prairie itself. They had both found what they were running toward, and they built it together, side by side. The end.